One introduction. My name is Sandy. I lived on the street for 2 years. Life was very hard. I slept outside every night. My bed was a piece of cardboard. I put it behind a big, fancy bakery. The street was always cold, even in the winter. I had no home and no money. I felt very alone. I had no family to call. I had no friends to help me. Every day felt the same, gray and difficult. I often watched the people walking by. They looked happy. They had warm coats and nice shoes. I felt like I did not belong in this world. I was like a ghost to them. I had one special thing that helped me. It was a small notebook. I also had 3 cheap pencils. They were my most important things. I kept them safe inside my jacket. When I was not too cold or too hungry, I opened the notebook. I sat on the sidewalk and started to draw. I drew many things, but mostly I drew dresses. Beautiful, long dresses. I drew expensive shoes and shiny jewelry. The bakery smelled wonderful. It smelled of fresh bread and sweet sugar. This smell was a funny contrast to my cold, dirty life just 10 feet away. I often heard the happy sounds of people laughing inside. I knew they were warm. I knew they had full stomachs. I tried not to listen. I focused on my pencil moving across the white paper. I used my imagination to create colors that did not exist in my gray world. I drew dresses in bright red, deep blue, and shining gold. These drawings were my treasure. I had maybe 50 pages of these treasures. When I drew, I forgot the cold street. I forgot the hunger. In my mind, I was not Sandy, the poor girl on the street. I was a queen. My drawings made me feel important and beautiful. It was my secret world. People walked past the bakery all the time. They were busy. They carried bags full of food or clothes. They never stopped. They never looked at my face. If they saw me, they looked through me. They did not see a person. They saw only the street. I was invisible to them. I kept drawing because it was the only way to feel real. I hoped that one person would finally see me, but the day always ended the same way, with me folding my cardboard and closing my notebook, still invisible. 2. The man in the rain. It was a Tuesday morning. The weather was very bad. Rain fell hard and fast onto the city streets. The air was cold and the sidewalk was wet. I was sitting in my usual spot. I felt small and invisible as always. But this Tuesday was different. This day changed everything for me. A big, black car stopped nearby. It was a luxury car. It looked very new and clean. A door opened and a man stepped out quickly. He was tall and looked strong. He wore a beautiful gray suit. This suit looked very expensive and perfect. He also wore shiny black shoes. His name was Julian. I knew he owned the big fashion company across the street. He was a very important person in the city. I saw him walking toward the bakery. I felt nervous. I did not want him to see me. I quickly tried to move my few things. I pulled my notebook close to hide it, but my hands were cold and wet. I I dropped the notebook. It fell right into a big, muddy puddle on the sidewalk. I felt sick inside. My drawings were now wet and dirty. Julian stopped walking suddenly. He looked down at the puddle. He saw my wet, cheap notebook floating there. He looked at his beautiful shoes. They were almost touching the mud. He did not seem to care about his expensive clothes or the mud. He bent down slowly. He picked up the notebook carefully. The cover was soaked with rain. He opened it. He looked at the drawing on the top page. It was my favorite drawing, a long, red evening dress. I drew it to look like something a queen would wear. Julian held the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked up at me. His eyes were bright blue. They looked right into my face. My face was dirty and my clothes were old. People usually looked away quickly or they looked down. But Julian did not look away. He looked at me without judgment. It was a long look. It felt warm, not cold. For the first time in many months, I felt like a real person again. He spoke softly. "Did you draw this?" he asked. His voice was deep and kind. I could not speak. I only nodded my head up and down. Julian carefully tore the page with the red dress from the book. He took out $100 bill and put the money in my hand. "Come to my office tomorrow," he said. "Please come." 3. A small hope. Julian asked, "Did you draw this?" His voice was deep and friendly. I nodded my head quickly. I was too scared to speak a single word. Julian pulled the page gently from the wet notebook. He looked at the drawing of the red dress one last time. Then he put $100 bill in my hand. It was a large amount of money. I looked down at the paper. It felt like a dream. "Come to my office tomorrow," he said softly. "Please come and meet me." Then he turned and walked quickly to his black car. He drove away, leaving me standing alone with the money. I felt confused, but also warm. I held the $100 tightly. I did not sleep on the cold street that night. I used the money to buy a hot, real meal. Then I found a cheap hostel near the city center. It was not clean, but it had a shower and warm water. I needed to wash the street dirt away. I wanted to feel like a real person again, not just an invisible shadow. I stood in the small shower for a long time. My hair was very dirty from the rain and the cold ground. I washed my hair 3 times. Each wash felt like I was washing away the bad luck and the loneliness of the past year. I cleaned my face and my hands slowly. I felt the water rinse away the coldness I carried inside my body. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a different person. I was still thin, and my clothes were old, but my eyes looked different. They held a small, bright spark. I lay on the thin bed in the small hostel room. I was very nervous about meeting Julian tomorrow. He was a rich and famous man. He owned a huge fashion company. Why did he want to see me? Maybe he was just being kind for one day. Maybe he wanted to laugh at my cheap drawings. My mind moved fast, worrying about everything. But under the nervousness, there was a new, strong feeling. It was hope. It was a small, warm fire in my chest. It was the first warm feeling I had felt in many, many months. I knew this moment was the start of something important. I knew I could not miss this chance. I spent the rest of the evening preparing myself. I did not have any new clothes to wear. I tried to clean my jeans and my old shirt as best as I could. I practiced what I would say when I saw him. "Thank you for believing in my drawing." I practiced walking straight and holding my head high. I did not want to look like a girl from the street. I wanted to look like an artist. This meeting was the only chance I had to change my life. I had to be strong and ready. I fell asleep thinking about Julian's kind face and his bright blue eyes. For the office. The next day was very important. I felt nervous, but I had hope. I went to the big building. It was tall and made of glass. I walked inside the lobby. A security guard was standing near the door. He was a big man in a dark uniform. He stopped me quickly. He looked at my clean but old clothes. He said, "You cannot go here." I felt my face become hot. I started to think about leaving. I did not belong in this place. Then Julian came. He walked fast from the back of the room. He wore a nice gray suit. He looked very handsome. He smiled at the guard. "She is with me," Julian said simply. The guard moved away at once. Julian took my hand. His touch was warm and strong. We walked to the elevator. We went up many, many floors. Julian opened a large, quiet door. This was his private office. It was big and full of light. The room was beautiful. There were shelves with rolls of fabric everywhere. The fabrics were soft and colorful, like red silk and blue velvet. It was like a treasure room for a designer. I wanted to look at everything. Julian pointed to a large wooden table. He gave me many new, good pencils and clean, white paper. "Please draw something for me, Sandy," he said. I felt excited. I sat down and started to work. I drew a long dress with many small details. I forgot about the world outside. I only thought about the fabric and the shape. I drew for many hours. Julian sat close to me. He watched me work carefully. He did not speak much. The room was very quiet. I could hear the sound of the pencil moving on the paper. I felt his eyes watching me the whole time. Sometimes I looked up. Our eyes met for only 1 second. Then I looked down quickly. The air conditioning was running, but the room felt warm. I felt a strong, quiet electric feeling between us. It was a new and strange feeling. My heart started beating very, very fast in my chest. I was working on a small bow detail on the waist of the dress. Julian moved closer to see the line I drew. He touched my hand softly. His fingers stayed there for a moment. He was looking at the pencil, but I only felt his touch. I stopped breathing. I knew this moment was the start of something important. 5. The storm. Sandy and Julian worked late into the night. They were working on new designs for the winter collection. Julian watched Sandy draw with her cheap pencil. He loved her ideas. Time passed very quickly. When they looked up, the sky was completely black. A terrible storm started outside the tall office building. The rain came down fast and hard. It hit the windows with a loud noise. The wind howled around the top of the building. Julian checked the news on his computer. "The roads are closed," he told Sandy. "It is too dangerous for you to leave now." Julian knew Sandy lived in a small, cheap hostel far away. He could not let her go back in the storm. "You must stay here," he said kindly. Julian lived in a penthouse apartment. It was on the floor right above his office. Sandy felt her heart beat very fast. This was a very big risk. Julian was a very famous, rich man. Sandy was a girl who had slept on the street just days ago. She felt like nobody. But the storm made the decision for them. She followed him up the stairs. The apartment was huge. It had soft lights and very big windows. They sat down on a large, comfortable sofa. Julian went to the kitchen. He came back with 2 warm cups. "Hot chocolate," he smiled. Sandy took the cup. The heat felt good in her cold hands. They did not talk about business or drawings. They talked about simple things. Julian looked at Sandy for a long time. His eyes were very kind. Sandy felt safe next to him. She was not invisible here. She was important. The electric feeling between them grew stronger and stronger. Julian slowly leaned closer. He moved his face near hers. Then he kissed her. The kiss was very soft at first, but then it became deeper. It was a long kiss, full of feeling and hunger. The storm outside seemed far away. Later, Julian took her to his bedroom. Sandy slept in his large bed. It was covered with soft blankets. They held each other close. Sandy felt completely safe. She was warm for the first time in years. The storm raged outside, but inside Julian's arms, everything was quiet and perfect. She knew the morning would bring problems, but tonight she was only happy. 6. Bad news. The trouble started the next morning. I left Julian's apartment quietly. I wanted to go before the business day began. A woman was cleaning the hall outside the penthouse door. She saw me walk out. This woman had a modern phone with a camera. She quickly took a photo of me leaving the famous penthouse. This was a very bad, terrible thing for Julian. In just a few hours, the photo was everywhere. It was on the internet and in every newspaper across the city. The newspaper headlines were very big and very loud. They called the story, "Fashion King Dates Homeless Girl." Everyone saw the photo of us. People laughed at me online. They wrote terrible things about me and about Julian. They said I was only using Julian for his money and his rich life. They said I was not a serious designer. They did not know that Julian truly believed in my talent and my drawings. Julian's business partners saw the news story immediately. They were very, very angry about the scandal. They came to the office building quickly to have a meeting with Julian. I heard them shouting loudly from the next room. Their voices were full of frustration and anger. They spoke only about Julian's reputation and his company's future. They said the news story was a big scandal that the company could not survive. They told Julian that I would ruin his whole business. They said I must leave the city right away. I sat alone in Julian's private office. I listened to the loud, angry voices. I felt deep, heavy shame. Julian was the first person to ever help me in my life. He gave me a chance to draw and create beautiful things. He gave me a warm place to sleep during the storm. But now, I was destroying his good business name and his future. I did not want to hurt him. I did not want to destroy his success. I knew I could not stay here any longer. I went back upstairs to the penthouse quickly. I found a small piece of writing paper in the kitchen. I wrote a thank you note to Julian. The note was simple and short. It said, "Thank you for believing in me." I put the note on his large, expensive wooden desk so he would see it later. I picked up my old, worn notebook and my cheap pencils. These were the only things I owned. I walked out of the apartment door. I did not look back at the beautiful view of the city. I ran away from Julian and the scandal. I was alone again, but I still had the hope he gave me, and I still had my drawings. 7. Hard work. I ran away from Julian, but I did not go back to the cold streets. I was strong now. I decided to use this new strength. I had some money from Julian. It was the money he paid me for my first drawings. It was enough to start a new life, a small life. I knew I could not stop now. I went to a fabric store. I bought good cloth, not cheap material. I bought thread and new needles. I rented a very small room. It was not a fancy office, but it was safe and warm. I started to sew. I worked every day, morning until night. I did not stop. I made my designs come true. I made the beautiful dresses from my notebook. I used a cheap computer to take photos of the dresses. Then I opened a small store online. I called it Sandy's Designs. It was very simple. At first, no one bought anything. I felt worried, but I kept working. I waited for one customer. Then the orders started slowly. One person bought a dress, then 2 people. The people who bought my clothes loved them. They wrote good things online about my talent. My name became famous again, but this time it was for my work. People forgot the scandal about the rich man and the homeless girl. They only talked about the beautiful dresses. 6 months passed. My business grew very, very fast. I needed help. I hired 2 other sewers to work with me. We moved to a bigger room. Then 12 months passed. My business was huge now. I was making millions of dollars. I was very proud. I used the money to buy my own office building. It was not the big company building like Julian's, but it was mine. I bought new desks and big cutting tables. I was a millionaire now. I did this with only my hands and my talent. I was no longer defined by where I slept. I was defined by my hard work. 8. The happy end. I worked hard for 12 months. I spent all my time creating beautiful clothes. Now it was time for my first big fashion show. Hundreds of people came to see my work. Bright lights were everywhere. Models walked the runway wearing the dresses I designed. I felt very happy and proud. This was my dream finally real. I stood backstage, watching the success that came from my own hard work. The show ended. The audience clapped very loudly. I walked onto the stage to thank them for coming. The lights were extremely bright. I looked quickly at the front row of seats. Then I stopped walking. I could not believe my eyes. Julian was sitting there. I did not expect to see him after all this time. He looked a little tired, maybe older, but he was still handsome in his dark suit. He was holding something small in his hands. I looked closer. It was the old piece of paper. It was the drawing of the red dress. The very first drawing he bought from me when I was sleeping on the street. Julian stood up slowly. He walked past the security guards and onto the stage. The cameras quickly turned to focus on him. The large audience became very quiet. He walked until he stood very close to me. He did not look at the cameras or the people watching. He only looked straight into my face. "Sandy," he said. His voice was soft, but the microphone made it loud across the room. "You did this amazing thing by yourself. You are incredible." Tears came to my eyes immediately. "I missed you every single day since you left my apartment," he told me. I wanted to tell him I missed him too, but I could not speak. I took one step closer to him. He put the old drawing down on a nearby chair. He did not care about the old scandal now. He did not care about his business partners or their anger. He took my face in his hands. Then he kissed me deeply in front of everyone. It was a long, happy kiss. The cameras flashed more than 50 times. The audience cheered loudly for us. We were not just two people anymore. We were two strong partners standing together. I was no longer the poor girl who drew on cardboard. He was no longer just the rich fashion king. We were equal. We were now partners in business and partners in life and love. This was the true happy end.